In episode 166 I have built a custom arcade light gun using the internals of a HEP45 cal. In that episode I explained the origin and significance of the latter and introduced methods that allow people to use arcade guns on PC. To my great fortune, a viewer of the channel called Amir Hafiz donated one of the shown boards. In the current episode I will speak about the origin of the boards, present the item itself, and then demonstrate it in action. I will end the episode with an interview of David R. Foley, who is one of the board's developers. Mr. Foley started work on emulation in the early 80s. He made CPU emulators, went on to make an Apple II emulator, and later he wrote a Sega Mega Drive emulator. Towards the end of the millennium, Mr. Foley developed multi-game arcade machines that ran on custom emulators. These were first sold as Hyperware by Quantum 3D and later as Ultracade by Ultracade Technologies. One of the planned multi-game cabinets was called Ultragun and was about to contain 6 classic light gun games. The interface board, which would later be known as Optigun, was conceived for this cabinet. It is a multi-function device that allows people to connect HEP-style arcade light guns to computers, where the screen tracking is treated as joystick input. The arcade developer Global VR bought some designs, assets and licenses from Ultracade Technologies in 2006, which included portions of the arcade emulation and the gun interface design, which they eventually used as USB2Gun in their arcade cabinet America's Army, which they launched in 2007. In the same year, Mr. Foley co-founded Nanotech Entertainment, which improved and updated the gun interface concept, and finally commercially offered it as Optigun. LCD screens had been around for some time by then, but that very year was the first time ever the international sales of LCD screens surpassed the one of CRTs. Mr. Foley had an answer to that and was developing a gun interface that would work on any kind of screen, no matter the image technology. The system used 4 acoustic sensors, which were placed at the screen. These sensors picked up a sonic signal emitted by the gun. Besides very accurate tracking, the system was also capable of measuring the distance to the player and even the angle of the gun. Furthermore, the range was exceptionally good. Even if the player was about to press the nozzle of the gun against the screen, the system would still track the shots. HEP Controls was ought to be the exclusive arcade partner for this so-called Sonic Game System, or SGS. But Nanotech also planned to release a home version of this device. Sadly, the system was never commercially released and today just a few prototypes remain. The version I own is the so-called IO PCB for dedicated games variant of the USB2Gun, which was distributed by Global VR and manufactured by Spud Logic. Besides that, Global VR also offered a version that connects to JAMA interfaces. By placement of a jumper, the user defines the sync frequency and resolution of the RGB video, which is fed into the board. CGA, EGA, VGA and SVGA are supported. The video that is outputted to the second DE15 connector is appended by a white flash that appears if the player pulls the trigger. Contrary to many other contemporary PC light gun solutions, here the gun is always tracking the screen. The flash is just present to help with dark areas which wouldn't be sensed otherwise. The light information is translated to generic joystick inputs and is sent to the computer. Off-screen shoot reloading is supported and acts as a joystick button. Because of this simplicity, a vast array of operating systems and computers are supported, typically without manual driver installation, as standard joystick drivers are sufficient. I tested Windows XP, Windows 7 and Windows 10, in all of which the interface was easy to interact with. These OS allowed the USB2Gun to be set up in the Windows Game Controller settings. Besides the screen tracking portion, the interface contains a fully fledged 35 watts audio amplifier, a solenoid valve compatible force feedback circuit, and headers for up to 24 digital inputs, which are translated to joystick controller buttons. The biggest disadvantage of the USB2Gun to the Optigun is that it shouldn't be connected directly to a USB host controller, which is located on the computer's mainboard, as else the user risks damage caused by static shocks. The arcade units that utilized the USB2Gun used an additional USB host controller on a PCI expansion card as mediator. This makes operation on a notebook computer a whole lot more complex. A modern solution close to the original recommendation would be to connect the interface over an external USB host controller via Thunderbolt 3, which is almost USB 4, to the computer, as those lines contain a full PCIe lane. Sadly, such controllers are rather pricey. I also did tests with the galvanic separation between computer and USB2Gun, taking the power from a powered USB hub as supply. This worked to some degree, but the positional tracking clearly got worse. I also did some tests connecting the USB2Gun directly to a notebook. There, it made a significant difference on whether I used a mainboard USB socket or one which is connected via a daughterboard. The Optigun is very similar to the USB2Gun, but deviates in a couple of points. Besides the digital inputs, the board also offers 8 digital outputs that allowed the connection to coin counters and similar objects. The Optigun auto-detects resolution and sync frequency and also supports XGA resolution, which is similar in quality to HD 720p. Last but not least, a pin header allegedly allowed reflashing the firmware. Programs that allow joystick inputs to act as light gun device, such as MAME, support the USB2Gun right away. For games that expect mouse inputs to emulate light guns, I use the program Joystick Mouse Tool by Dynmeister Digital Delusions, which translates joystick to mouse inputs. This program spams the last tracked position until it receives a new one. Thus, it either requires games that don't mind false tracking if the gun isn't shooting, or demands monitor adjustments to ensure the whole screen is sufficiently bright. Supplying the USB2Gun with a VGA video feed in the proper resolution and frequency can be a challenging task in these modern times. Many current graphics cards or computers don't have a VGA socket anymore, and those ones still sporting a DVI socket often use a variant which is incompatible to VGA. For desktop computers, the easiest solution is to install a suited graphics card, but for notebook computers, the solution is less obvious. Again, one approach is here to connect an external graphics card via Thunderbolt 3. Commercially, such solutions are known as Egpu Enclosures. Typically, ATI and AMD video cards are less of a struggle to get proper VGA signals off, and some of them are compatible to a program called CRT-MU Driver, which offers further control and simplifies the usage of 15 kHz TV screens on computers. An alternative approach would be to use a HDMI signal and convert it to VGA by an external device. Personally, I used a Kramer VP422 for this, and I recommend it warm-heartedly. Unfortunately, modern NVIDIA GPUs and Intel CPUs tend to mess up HDMI feeds in SVGA resolution. Apparently, upon setup in Windows, they letterbox the correct 800x600 pixels in something bigger. This causes a false aspect ratio and unused screen estate. I recommend displaying a circle to objectively judge the aspect ratio of the screen. Luckily, I found ways to fix the issue for Intel and NVIDIA machines that can be followed after the resolution was set in Windows. For Intel CPUs, go into the Intel HD Graphics control panel and select the option Scale Full Screen. For NVIDIA GPUs, the issue can be resolved by going to the NVIDIA System Controls window and messing with any setting of the target screen. Surprisingly, after applying changes, the card will notice its error and start displaying proper 800x600 via HDMI. Personally, I changed the location of a multi-screen setup to trigger the behavior, but there are plenty of options. Foxhole of the Arcade Controls forum recommended me a program called Custom Resolution Utility, which gives the user much more control over resolution and sync. It should be able to fix even stubborn cases if my tips didn't work for you. In this segment, I would like to touch on the performance of the interface. I tested it with a HEP 45 cal and my custom HEP compatible light gun. I tested a Sony Trinitron Multiscan E200, 31 kHz monitor with SVGA, and the B&O Beovision MX4000 TV with the SD video signal while the interface is set to CGA. The tracking is very responsive, precise and accurate. As already mentioned, the gun tracks positions constantly, but additionally flashes the screen white upon pressing the trigger. On the 15 kHz TV I quickly achieved perfect tracking. I had to resort to some trickery to obtain a 15 kHz signal, which causes the white flash to turn black instead, but I'm sure with more time I could find the problem and will revisit this topic again in the future if there is an interest. The particular combination of video source, 31 kHz monitor and gun I'm testing yields in dead zones when using the USB2Gun. As it is so often the case with light guns, these dead zones are at the left hand side and at the bottom of the screen. Dead zones like this often aren't a huge problem, but in the particular case of the USB2Gun, which doesn't offer a dedicated calibration dialog nor a bespoke joystick to mouse conversion tool, the dead zones are the system's gravest drawback. In MAME, the system relies on the calibration routine of each particular game. If now one or more of the calibration points lay in the dead zone, this will deprive the USB2Gun of its perfect accuracy, because the calibration has to be performed using offsets. With a bit of practice, decent results can be achieved, similar in performance to the standard calibration of an ActLabs USB gun. One of the games I have tested was Carnival, which is indeed affected as it has both of its calibration points in the dead zone. As stated earlier, another big use case of the USB2Gun is to use it as a mouse by the means of joystick mouse tool. But as it wasn't made specifically for the USB2Gun, it lacks a few features that would make the experience flawless. Personally, I would suggest 3 additions. First and most important, a calibration dialog. Second, the option to just track the coordinates of the gun after a shot was fired. Last but not least, the option to just convert fresh coordinates and skipping the same coordinates after a few repetitions. Without this last option, currently the mouse locks on the system if the gun is pointing off screen because the last measured input is spammed until a new one is received. Without means of calibration, joystick mouse tool has to rely on Windows for that task. In the Windows Game Controller settings, the USB2Gun can be calibrated as standard joystick by tracing the borders of the screen with the gun. This yields again in a decent accuracy reminiscent of the ActLabs USB gun. From a non-business end user perspective, in my opinion, the biggest selling point the USB2Gun brings to the table is its compatibility with real arcade light guns. The latter are typically of an outstanding quality and are super comfortable to use. Using these controllers with pinpoint accuracy for some emulated games that are not affected by the previously mentioned flaw is a real joy. In a limited fashion, a similar experience is also available using the ActLabs USB gun, as ActLabs later sold controllers that were modeled after the fabulous Recoil SFX arcade guns. Other than that, I don't think the USB2Gun manages to significantly outclass its contemporary alternatives. It's very appealing that the interface is working as well as it does without any GUI, but the lack thereof is also what prevents it from excelling more widely. Arcade Controls Forum member Jolly West discovered in 2014 how to control the USB2Gun in more detail with the software MAME hooker. Particularly exciting are the abilities to control the flash behavior and the force feedback. The flash can even be turned off completely if desired. Thinking outside the end-user perspective, in my opinion, the Optigun and the USB2Gun were a brilliant invention, and I'm not surprised at all that they found successful adaptation in arcades. I will end this video with an interview I was able to make with David Foley. I will summarize the questions and answers in audio, but will display the actual conversation in text. When being asked about the conception of the Optigun, Mr. Foley talked about the Ultracade roots of the interface. I learned that the Ultracade had its humble beginning as a school project in the 80s. Mr. Foley designed the Optigun as a single-piece I/O board because of his experiences he obtained doing an American laser game system for global VR. Most of his items were consciously designed to be tough enough for arcade usage, but versatile enough for home users. I wanted to know whether there were simpler predecessors and prototypes of the Optigun. Mr. Foley explained to me that because many of his boards are multifunctional already, it wasn't a big effort to make the Optigun very feature-rich from the very beginning too. When being asked why he decided to have the Optigun to act like a joystick rather than a mouse, Mr. Foley explained that with the used I/O chip this was the simpler approach. That many operation systems easily interact with joysticks was also taken into account. The Optigun design was eventually sold. It intrigued me whether the new owner continued to offer similar products. Sadly, the company who bought the rights went out of business. I told Mr. Foley that I'm surprised the Optigun wasn't more successful than it was and that I think it would still sell today. He also thought that the system had more opportunity. Mr. Foley is aware of the recent developments in the home arcade space from companies like Arcade1Up. To him, this confirms the demand for systems similar to the ones he developed almost 2 decades ago. When being asked whether he still plays light gun games in private, Mr. Foley told me that he owns one of the Sonic gun system prototypes and that he's using it from time to time. At the end, I asked Mr. Foley about his favorite light gun games. He's fond of Midway's Carnival and PNP Marketing's Police Trainer, but he also likes the Time Crisis series a lot. This video is dedicated to Amir Hafiz, who was so generous to donate the USB2Gun to this channel. Thank you very much, Amir. This is the end of the review. My name is Ben. I thank you for viewing.